Previously on Higurashi When They Cry console arcs.
約束してほしい。どんなに憎いとか恨みとかを抱えていても決して会って話をする。それ以上のことはないと。お願い。
ミナイさん、
仲良く会いなさいってお願いするのは絶対無理だと分かっている。だけどもうこれ以上の悲しい事件は見たくない。残酷な言い方だけど、どんなに憎しみや恨みを晴らしたところで壊れてしまったものはもう元には戻らない。だから約束して。
わかりました。約束します。
After witnessing the calmness in Nagisa's reply, Tomoe strengthened her resolve and tore a page out of her police notebook, then wrote down Reina Ryuugu's address. Then she folded it in half and handed it to Nagisa.
南沢村。ここがレイナのいるところなんですね。
何？
私の車に、あれ、人
Tomoe turned to get a good look of her own. It was dark since there weren't many lights in the area, but she could still make out three people. Uh-oh. One of them was holding something near the keyhole on the driver's side door, carefully working it.
車上荒らし？
こら、あんたたち!
Just as she screamed began to charge at them. What the? A roar rang out as Maka's car exploded, and the blast sent the two of them flying like dead weight. Holy shit! Tomoe quickly shielded Maka as she slammed into the ground and rolled along the asphalt. Tomoe cautiously raised her head to look around the parking lot, then gasped and froze in shock. The smell of burning gasoline drifted through the entire area. The hood and windows of Maka's car were belching thick plumes of smoke, and flames were emanating from the body of the car.
何が？事故の死傷者は？
二人全身やけどなどで意識不明の重体だ。一人は何とか命を取り留めたようだが、口と喉を傷つけたようで事情聴取は当分無理だな。
通行人やその他の人に怪我はありませんでしたか？
ああ、不幸中の幸いだった。数台の車が爆風と破砕した部品で損傷したとのことだが、当時駐車場には誰もいなかったようだ。夜でよかった。昼ならこんなものでは済まなかっただろう。
Tomoe swallowed her words and kept silent. It was certainly true that more pedestrians would have been nearby in the daytime, leading to significantly more victims. However, Maka probably wouldn't have been as traumatized if it hadn't happened at night. At least then, old wounds wouldn't have resurfaced. Just then.
柿内署交通課より連絡。大巻の国道でトラックにひかれた女子学生の身元が判明。氏名は尾崎渚。
What the hell?
頭部圧迫破壊により心肺停止状態の模様。
Cranial compression.
繰り返す。
The voice on the radio was full of static. It was coming from far away. But she could hear it. Nagisa. Ozaki. She was hit by a truck and died immediately.
藤田君、大至急で大巻に向かって。
え？
早く！
南井次長、口を慎みたまえ。年上に対してその発言は聞き捨てならんぞ。
I'll speak to whatever elder, however I please, if said elder is going to talk down to me this way.
じゃあ今の小島補佐の発言は何だって言うんですか？明らかに南井さんへの侮辱です。訂正してください。
そういう見方もあるということだ。まあそれにしても君もとんだ猫かぶりだな。妹が妹なら姉も姉。素性と血は争えんということか。
That line breached the end of Tomoe's patience. She completely flew off the handle.
もう一度言ってみろ。言っていいことの区別もつかねえのか、このクソじじい。
待ってください、南井さん。やめてください。頼みますから。
話せ、藤田。こいつは
そうですね。県警の捜査一課が感づいたようですから、おそらく飛行機に乗り込む前になるかと。いずれにしても大騒ぎになりますよ。激務のストレスの積み重ねで狂気を起こし、憂さ晴らしに患者を殺害。そして警察に追い詰められた末にその枠乱を爆発させて自殺。なかなか説得力のあるシナリオだと思いませんか？そんな言われ方は心外ですね。最後にとびっきりいいワインを飲ませてやったんですよ。死での旅には過ぎた代物だと思いますけどね。ま、せめてもの慈悲ってことで。あと例の架空口座の通帳は回収済みです。もっと派手に使いまくると思っていたんですけどね。引き出していたのはほんの少しだけでした。いやいや、金の使い方のわからない貧乏人は悲しいですね。見たこともない大金にビビっちゃったんでしょうか。それでは。さて、そろそろかな。
Just then, a large crowd of policemen ran down the walkway next to the payphone. And beyond that flow, a loud commotion could be heard.
さすがだな。時間ぴったり。じゃ、平沼陽子さん、良い旅を。
それじゃ私が彼を窓から突き落としたとでも言うんですか？無茶を言わないでください。彼と私じゃ体格差がまるで違うんですよ。どうやって自分以上の背格好の人を窓まで連れて天津さえ落とすことができるって言うんですか？逆に抵抗されて私が落とされるだけです。
まあ普通に考えればそうです。ただこうも考えられなかった？
What if he was on some kind of sedative?
彼が自ら窓に近づいて窓の縁のところに上がったと。そうすればあなたは軽く突き飛ばすだけで彼を。
それこそ意味がわかりません。なぜ彼がそんな危険な真似を自分からするんですか？
そりゃ簡単です。危険だと思わなかったからだべ。こいつ先今度は被疑者確保を両手を自由にさせるな。
Hiranuma shook her hair about and cried out in a strange voice while picking up the fruit knife that had fallen out of her carry-on bag. Then she swung in all directions in an effort to intimidate the detectives. And then, noticing the gap between the detectives, she managed to open her blade. She ran toward the back window in an effort to escape. Then... she plunged the knife into her own throat and stabbed it in over and over again. The dull, gurgling sound of an overflowing viscous liquid rang out. while a stream of bright red blood fell down to the floor. Out of nowhere, a grief-stricken stream came out, strong enough to tear through silk. The surrounding detectives all froze in horror. Even Honjo felt the urge to vomit at the miserable sight.
ホンダ救急隊に連絡蘇生器具とレスキューキット持ってこさせろ
一人で片手間ではか。
That was certainly true. But 2 children that she knew had already fallen victim. Could she dismiss the case as being blocked on all sides, just as he said?
そうだ。
There was another incident where a person not showing any abnormalities suddenly changed and attacked a person. Reina, right? Even though she had convinced herself there was no such thing just a moment ago. But isn't the Reina Ryuugu case a perfect example of that?
だとしたら、やっぱりあの子は。
There was a possibility that Reina Ryuugu had to have some connection to this series of incidents. In which case, if she investigated the girl's background a little more thoroughly, surely... Just then, the phone directly in front of her began to ring. Though she was confused for a moment by a sudden interruption, Tomoe quickly switched back to normal and picked up the receiver.
はい、もしもし。
南井次長、山沖所長がお呼びです。所長室へお越しください。
所長が？
Having received a call from the General Affairs Office, likely needing her to act as Monika's representative in her absence, Tomoe got up and rose to her feet. And so it continues. Greetings, my name's Neosekken, and welcome back to my Let's Play of the Higurashi When They Cry console arcs. So, who's ready for another episode of things going wrong? I know I am. Let's get right into it, shall we?
失礼します。お呼びでしょうか。
うん。まあ、かけたまえ。
はい。
On that prompting, Tomoe took his seat on the sofa. The familiar soft touch and unique smell of leather made it comfortable to sit on.
そういえば、このソファーに座ったことって今までなかったな。
That was largely because she didn't want to spend much time in the chief's office. She always spoke with Yamaoki and received her orders while standing. Yamaoki turned his back to Tomoe and stared out the window while smoking a cigarette. He's right by the window, Tomoe. There's a perfect opportunity to make him play his future role as Superman right now. Go push him! Something felt slightly out of place. All this time, Tomoe never knew him to smoke.
待たせたな。さて、本題に入るか。
Yamaoki grabbed a piece of paper from his desk and sat down in front of Tomoe. It was a single-page letter. The name Tomoe Minai was written on it. And...
何ですかこれは。
Tomoe suddenly stood up with the letter in hand. Her eyes were opened wide as she reviewed the contents over and over again. Am I being taken off something? She couldn't immediately comprehend the inorganic arrangement of letters on the page. Or rather, she didn't want to. Rage and bewilderment ran rampant inside her head, and a sense of vertigo caused her vision to momentarily cloud over. It would be deemed acceptable. If it would be deemed acceptable, she would want to tear the letter to pieces right here. It took a great deal of effort to resist the intense impulse.
内容の通りだ。警察庁の広報室からの依頼で、君を報道対応の特務係長として招聘したいと。つまりそういうことだ。
Oh. Thanks to recent developments in the mass media, information on criminal cases is now immediately available to the public. As a result, there is a potential risk of damaging the reputation of the victims, perpetrators, and any other related parties. But if the media isn't provided any official information, then every organization could arbitrarily release their own articles based on speculation and incomplete information, which may lead to misunderstandings and false information. As such, there is an urgent need for the National Police Agency to set up a specialized organization to regulate the information disseminated to the media. However,
待ってください。自分はこの書き写し書に来てまだ2ヶ月です。このような急すぎる人事異動は非常識ではありませんか？
研修出向の期間に最長期限はあっても最短はない。出向先の責任長が研修目標を達成したと判断すれば、その時点で終了だ。
In fact, even though she was only there for 2 months, Tomoe had achieved far more than Yamaoki and the others expected. In conventional investigation, the detective's primary activity is utilizing their intuition and experience. As a result, differences in investigators' abilities can lead to multiple oversights and duplication of information. Upper management and on-site investigators were interested in improving that inefficiency. Under those circumstances, it was no exaggeration at all to say that the profiling analysis techniques that Tomoe pioneered gave investigators relevant guidelines and valuable clues to solve those problems. That development was highly praised within the National Police Agency, and further research and testing will be conducted from now on, leading to potential full-scale adoption down the road.
この短期間でこれだけの成果を上げるとは私も予想していなかった。君はこの功績を十分に誇ってもいいのだよ。
The timing of this promotion feels really off to me, to say the least, considering everything I'm currently smack dab in the middle of. You sure you're not just trying to shuffle me out of the way of something? Yamaoki?
お世辞はやめてください。そもそも報道対応といったものは刑事の自分ではなく警察官僚の方々が職務に当たるのが通例ではありませんか？自分とは畑違いです。
デスクワーク専門の練習では捜査線上で開示してもいい情報の取捨選択が判断できないということだろう。まして酷かもしれんが、君はかつて被害者側に立ったことがあり、風評による二次被害を予防するには何が必要か、彼らの立場で考えることができると思う。君はその2つの条件を満たしている最適な人材だというのが上層部の判断だ。
それはですが私は。
君の意思はこの際考慮には含まれない。重ねて言うがこれは命令だ。君も公僕の人間ならば上からの命令には従いたまえ。
Tomoe was still upset that she didn't have a chance to argue her side of the story. But she understood that fact and kept quiet. All civil servants, regardless of organization, had no right to defy a direct order for personal reasons.
だけど
There were still a large number of unresolved cases under investigation. Passing that on to other detectives at the station would cause unnecessary hardship for them. Not to mention, she still hadn't grasped the truth behind the Nagisa Ozaki case. Even if she wholeheartedly wanted to pursue the culprit, she'd never be able to solve anything if she wasn't working as a detective, actively investigating the case. The girl who said Tomoe was kind-hearted and thanked her for all her help. When they last met, the girl was trying her hardest to believe she could reconcile with her old friend. But it was impossible for her to set things right, since her untimely death took her before she could accomplish anything. Plus, Tomoe had already identified a clearly fishy suspect that she was hoping to investigate. And yet...
お願いします。お願いします、所長。
So, even though it was nearly impossible to overturn a decision like this, if there was any hope of doing so, Tomoe was willing to bet on it.
もう少しだけ。あと3ヶ月。いえ、1ヶ月でも結構です。私に時間をいただけませんか？このままじゃ終われない。終わりたくない。まだ私にはやりたいこと、やらなきゃいけないことがあるんです。
例の大巻の事件のことは藤田君から聞いている。だから君の気持ちは分かっているつもりだ。
だったらせめて。
ではその1ヶ月で何かがつかめるのかね。その根拠は、その自信は。うぬぼれたことを言うな、南井君。君一人であがいて立ち回ったとしても結局何も得られないどころか、無理を重ねることで君自身が壊れることもあり得る。君はそれで一生懸命やったと自己満足できるかもしれんがね、結果が出なければやらないのと同じだ。自分に言い訳をするだけの行為だよ、それは。
そんなのやってみなければわからない。
Tomoe slammed the table in front of her while leaning closer to Yamaoki. Why? Why is he exerting so much pressure to defy me this time? What does he know about me?
やってみたこともやってみようともしなかったあなたにそんなこと言わせない。言われたくない。あなたに何がわかる？何がわかるのよ。希望も未来もあった子が、幸せになる資格があった子が思いを遂げられないまま死んだ。殺された。なのに刑事のくせに私には何もできなかった。そしてこれからはもっとできなくなる。だから私は
それを自己満足だというのだよ、巴君。
Yamaoki quietly stared at the rage in Tomoe's eyes. Her tremendous sorrow and frustration were insufficient to sway his heart.
犯罪者を捕まえても失われたものは何も戻ってこない。そして被害者やその家族もまた10日のものでなければその喪失感を埋めることはできない。10日とはすなわち被害者の命だ。
And needless to say, the souls of the dead can never be brought back. So unless you're a god, it's impossible to fully heal the wounds of the people left behind.
ならば君の今やろうとしていることは誰にとっても何の価値も生み出さない無意味なものだ。
Finding the truth behind behind her death and how it relates to her boyfriend's death won't create any value for anyone? Really?
違うかね。
しかし正義はあります。ならば警察が動いて犯人を捕らえる意義も理由もあるはずです。それを教えてくれたのは山沖さん、あなたでしょ。
確かに以前私はそう言った。しかしそれは君の正義で警察全体の正義ではない。
I'm talking about justice for Nagisa and Kouhei.
そして警察の正義は君のそれとは相反する判断を下した。受け止めたまえ。
Then what? Then the justice I believe in is different from that of other people? Is that what you want to say? The blood rushed to Tomoe's head. She suddenly leaned toward Yamaoki, with every last bit of her strength focused on clenching her fists. However, Yamaoki quietly gazed at her while calmly enduring her violent outburst.
頭を冷やすんだ、巴君。君のその考え方はいかにも感情的で短絡的だ。英雄願望は結構だが、自分の思いを通すことが正義だというのなら、正義は人の数だけ存在することになる。君は我々警察がなすべきことをもっとよく考えるべきだ。
She couldn't say anything in protest, There was no meaning to revenge. Yamaoki had remonstrated her as much the other day. And media correspondence at the public relations office was more important than her involvement in this one particular case. That must have been what they determined. But then, how would she fill the empty void in her heart? How could she suppress the urge to be swallowed by the darkness of hatred and despair? And on top of that,
どうして
there was one more thing that Tomoe still couldn't understand.
どうしてこの要請を断ってくださらなかったんですか？あなたなら、私を推薦組に選んでくださったあなたなら、広報室からの打診があっても断れたはずじゃないですか。なのになんで？
Yamaoki kept silent, and then changed his expression in response to Tomoe's fierce question. No matter how frustrated she was with him, she still had to ask.
あなたは去年、警備局の公安課長の椅子を蹴って、この書き打ちに来られたと聞きました。そして、10年以上も経って、父が最後にメモに書き残したこの地に来たということは、何かを掴んだ。そう私は考えていました。
巴君。
だから、私をこの書き打ちに呼んでくれたこと、嬉しかった。きっとあなたが、父の残した謎を解き明かすチャンスをくれたんだって。まどかのこと、推薦組のことは引っかかっていたけど、それよりもこの機会を作ってくれたことは本気で感謝していました。なのに、なんで私をこの書き打ちから遠ざけようとするんです？一体私は何のためにここに来たんですか？
That was right. That's right. This is Kakuichi. Tomoe was assigned a post in Kakuichi, the last place her father ever visited. She was appointed to the honorary position of an assistant director without the need to worry about the scorn of other officers. She felt that even if she protested, it wouldn't get overturned. She didn't care about any of the faction disputes. Because she had her own purpose. She was able to work toward that without anger or disappointment, and without needing to put up on a bold front. And yet, that purpose was being taken away from her? I think I got something stuck in my throat. No matter how well her investigation results were being evaluated, this was taking away the vision of hope Tomoe gleamed when she first came to Kakuichi. For long, Yamaoki took a deep breath and drooped his shoulders before breaking the silence to address Tomoe and attempt to calm her down.
要請の段階で断ることもできたな。だが、私はしなかった。
なぜですか？
広報室長の前のはキャリア組のホープで、将来の幹部候補だ。おそらく警察庁長官官房の実力者として、今後ラスワンを振るう立場となるだろう。そんな男に名前と実力を覚えられるのは、君のキャリア向上のためになるはずだ。
私のため？何がよ？何が私のためなのよ？そんなこと誰も頼んでない。父さんの敵を取る以上のことが他にあるって言うのか
？Tomoe tossed the letter down and spat those words out with the intensity on the verge of vomiting blood. She was shouting emotionally and no longer trying to maintain appearances, even though she believed in him. No matter how much she fought with her sister, she still believed this man was an ally who truly understood her. Come on, man. Get out of my throat. But in the end, was that just a false assumption? Was he simply keeping up appearances and not making any actual effort to understand how she felt? Was he just letting her play around under the scope of his own power in order to conceal his guilt of being unable to capture her father's murderer? Was that what this was?
出世すれば私が喜ぶと。何が正義だ。笑わせるな。あんたは偽善者だ。父さんの事件のことで行き詰まったから、そんなおためごかしでごまかそうとしている。別に私は偉くなりたくて警察に入ったわけじゃない。推薦組に選ばれたわけじゃない。それこそあんたの自己満足じゃないか。
偉そうなことをほざくな、青二歳が。力も後ろ盾もない貴様が気安く正義を語れるほどこの世界は甘くはない。
That was the very first time Yamaoki raised his voice in anger. Without thinking, Tomoe recoiled back into the sofa behind her. She was scared. And more than that, she was sad. She was able to continue venting her anger on Yamaoki to this extent because she was subconsciously reacting like a spoiled child. But after he said that, she just felt sad. And she felt helpless, lost to despair. No matter how passionately you feel, or how hard you work, when confronted by a massive organization, is there really no value to personal thoughts and convictions? That moment, tears began spilling out. She already knew. As a member of society, it was unfit for someone of her age to cry. But she just couldn't stop. And then, Tomoe realized. No matter how much time had actually passed, time had stood still for her ever since that day. Even when she acted grandiose and behaved aggressively, even when she engaged in intellectual debates, Tomoe Minai hadn't changed at all since she was 17 years old. Shameful. She was no different from a spoiled brat throwing a tantrum, was she?
ああ、怒鳴ってすまなかったな。
いえ、自分は泣いてなどいません。
Tomoe stared straight at Yamaoki with her eyes still moist. Yamaoki picked up the letter that had fallen to the floor, dusted it off, and offered it to Tomoe with a bitter smile while thinking back on her indomitable spirit.
南井巴警部、来月より警察庁広報室への移動を命じる。副省
南井巴、警察庁広報室への移動辞令、謹んで拝命。
うん。ならば下がっていい。
失礼します。
And then, Tomoe grabbed the letter containing her orders and left the chief's office without looking back. Such fucking bullshit. Yamaoki returned to his desk, then picked up the file sitting there and opened it. It was a formal letter of complaint against Assistant Director Tomoe Minai, submitted under the names of Deputy Chief Hana and 2nd Division Section Chief Okabe.
大行な真似を俗物が。
He nearly spat the words out, recognizing the vulgarity and hostility between the lines. The contents were subjective and emotional, so any examiner receiving it would be embarrassed just reading it. In all likelihood, those men were using it as a means to get rid of Tomoe, since she was otherwise outside their reach. And, even though the examiner at Prefectural Police HQ was from the same public security background as Yamaoki, there was no guarantee they'd have the superficial level of wisdom necessary to recognize that. This complaint was secretly transferred to Yamaoki by a former colleague and friend.
とりあえず これは俺の胸だけのものとしておく。時期の打分として無視するのもありだが、放っておくと最悪嬢ちゃんたちが傷物になるかもしれん。一応手は打っておけ。
When it comes to the examiner, it's possible to downplay this or hide it, and it could just become a minor power struggle between them. But this time, there's also the possibility this issue could run without limits. And it could cast suspicion against Yamaoki's relationship with Madoka and his selection of Tomoe for the recommended group. In which case, it could end up hurting the sisters the most. With that in mind, Yamaoki decided it would be best to transfer Tomoe to another department until things cooled down. So this was for our benefit, then. And if it's only until things cooled down, then is it possible to get transferred back? So the letter from Public Relations Director Maino was actually a godsend. But Yamaoki couldn't tell Tomoe that. As obstinate as she was, if he told her about this, she wouldn't hesitate to fight the accusation. And even if she proved the accusation false, it would deepen the suspicion that she wasn't assigned to this post on her own merits. No, that wasn't the only problem. If that's all it was at a level she could manage on her own. But more importantly, if the examiner were to focus on Yamaoki.
あとこれは内々の話だが、どうやら警視庁公安の一部の連中があのお嬢ちゃんをマークしている。しかも今回の告発のことを嗅ぎつけて、彼女をおとりか何かで利用しようと考えているようだ。
公安が一体何の目的で？
わからん。ただ彼女が探り回っていた事件と何か関係があるような気がする。あるいはお前が追っていた例のやつがな、警察庁の警備局、それに人事課のメンツとも連携して何やら妙な動きだ。
The Public Safety Division wouldn't leak intelligence information to another organization, even a fellow police organization. Doing so would invite insider threats. And it wasn't typical for the security police to rely on information possessed by the personal division either. But they almost always target police officers suspected of leaking information related to national scandals. Nevertheless, why would they be targeting someone like Tomoe, who was only investigating domestic cases that had no ties to foreign affairs, as far as we know? No, something did ring a bell. Even if it wasn't related to her, there was a case she was continuing to investigate even now. And so, those guys were. There was a still huge cloud of darkness around the case Tomoe's father was investigating. Enough so that Yamaoki still hesitated to tell her the full truth. In other words, the folks at the public security were laying bait in the water Tomoe was swimming in, hoping to get rid of her? A horrible thought came to mind. What if the people at public security wanted to set up a workplace accident? In other words, they wanted to somehow cause harm to Tomoe. You mean like what we already saw with Monika's car in the last episode? What if she was attacked? Or even killed? Was that what they were hoping for? If they took advantage of the opportunity gleaned from an accident like that, they'd have a good reason for intervening. Yamaoki simply couldn't afford to overlook the possibility. Members of the security police couldn't even reveal their mission details to their colleagues. It was their duty to do inhumane things in the interest of national security.
あのお嬢ちゃんは一度現場から遠ざけておいた方がいいな。下手をすれば消されるぞ。あの子たちの幸せをお前は未来の墓前に誓ったんだろう。
なあ、ユウスケ。俺はお前の仇を討てそうにない。だったらせめて、あの子だけでもと思うのは間違っているか？
Yamaoki sighed alone, while gazing at the birds through the blinds. He too felt the same as her. He hated being a powerless individual facing down a massive organization. No, he may have felt it even more strongly than she did.
あ、ミナイさん。ちょうどいいところに。
Bad timing, Fujita. Just bad timing all around. Fujita waved his hand as he called out to Tomoe, but once he caught a good look at her, he caught his breath. She was crying. The Tomoe Mina he knew had red, swollen eyes. Even though he thought it was discourteous, he couldn't help but feel embarrassed and speechless upon witnessing such a gallant and strong-minded woman crying.
ミナイさ
ん。ごめんね、藤田くん。最近花粉症がひどくって。もう、あんまり見ないでよ。
ああ、すみません。
Fujita looked away with a bitter smile on his face, while Tomoe wiped her eyes and nose with a handkerchief. Of course he knew she was lying.
そうですね。今年って花粉の飛散量がすごいらしいですから。あ、もしお困りでしたら、いい漢方薬を知ってますんで、今度持ってきますよ。
ええ、ありがとう。それで、何か用？
Tomoe pinched her nose with a tissue from her pocket, then turned to face him again. When Fujita saw that, he said, "Oh, that's right," and pulled an envelope out of his jacket pocket.
まず、これを。優勝係がさっき、ミナイさん宛ての郵便だって持ってきました。
私に、誰から？
When Tomoe saw the sender's name, her eyes opened wide. It was from the recently deceased, Nagisa Ozaki. What the hell?
消印の日付から見て、亡くなる2日前以前のものかと思われます。中身は読んでおりません。
そう。ありがとう。
What am I gonna find out in here, I wonder? It was in a lovely envelope, most likely a private message to her. With that in mind, Tomoe slipped it into her jacket pocket intending to read it later.
次に、早見さんからの報告です。死亡した尾崎渚ですが、左腕に注射痕が発見されました。何の薬物を打たれたのかはまだ発見できていません。
Oh, really? An injection mark, huh? Just like what happened to that nurse that committed suicide in the airport. Well, no, that wasn't an injection mark. That's right. She drank it, but an injection mark. She was given something by somebody.
そして現場には車か何かで運ばれて、その走行途中で車道へと放り出されたか、自ら飛び降りた様子とのことです。
じゃあ、走っている最中に転落したか、させられたってこと？
ええ。両方の肘と前腕部、大腿部の数箇所に擦過傷があり、左足首は捻挫していました。そして、被害者はどうやら車道に転落してから、しばらく自力で移動していたようでして、転落した場所から数メートルにわたって血痕が発見されました。
Perhaps she was dragging her legs in a state of semi-consciousness, trying to get out of the road. It was clear that the direction she was moving in was toward the sidewalk. Did they inject her with something that paralyzed her legs or something? Made her unable to get up and walk?
その後、発見現場で力尽きて倒れたのは脳震盪か、薬による昏睡か。
No, or it could have just been a potent anesthetic.
それについては頭部が損壊しているため鑑識では判断が難しいとのことでした。街灯の暗い場所に遺体があったのは偶然の可能性が高いですね。今回の事件では県警本部と柿内署による合同捜査本部が設置されるとのことです。二課の野郎が例によって名乗り出ているそうですが、どうします、皆井さん。
As Fujita said that, he was waiting for Tomoe to step in and say, "I'll take care of it." In fact, he had already talked over Section Chief Yamamura, and Hanada and Takayashiki had also offered to help. At first, they simply approached Tomoe out of mere curiosity, offering to be her bodyguards. But now, they completely sympathized with her. However,
任せましょう。また横取りだって騒がれても面倒だしね。
Fujita was at a loss for words after hearing that unthinkable response out of Tomoe. What did it mean? What on earth happened to the burning rage and vast sorrow she was displaying at the crime scene?
皆さん、
わざわざ報告ありがとう。とりあえずこの件については県警が主導で動いてくれるみたいだしね。私たちの出る幕じゃなさそうだから結果を待ちましょう。
それでいいんですか、皆井さん。俺はこれから捜査一課に乗り込んで俺たちのいつも用意させろってあなたから命令を受けるつもりでここにいるんですが。
Tomoe's heart shook at that massive temptation. If she gave the order, Fujita would go out and meet with Prefectural Police HQ immediately. Honestly, he went so far above and beyond for her as a subordinate. No, as a partner. On top of that, Hanada, Takayashiki, Ando, pretty much the entire 1st Division recognized the young newcomer as a comrade and respected her. So if there was anything they could do to help, they were on board. If she asked them to kneel before her, they would comply. But she couldn't. She couldn't do that anymore. Because her position, the power to command them, was already gone.
お疲れ様。今日はもう上がってもいいわよ。奥さんによろしくね。
ちょっと待ってください。
一人にさせてお願い。
After saying that, Fujita watched his boss solemnly turn her back and walk away. Tomoe went down the stairs past the 1st Investigation Division in order to avoid his gaze.
背景、南井刑事様。先日はいろいろと私のためにご尽力いただきまして、本当にありがとうございました。あの後、何度かお電話を差し上げたのですが、タイミングが悪く、その都度外出中とのことでしたので、お手紙をお送りすることにしました。実は、ご報告があります。先日、レイナと電話にて話をすることができました。それも信じられないことに、私からかけたわけじゃありません。レイナからかかってきたんです。でも、私にはあまりにも突然すぎて、それに、レイナもなんだかぎこちない感じで、お互いに何から話していいのかわからず、結局、あまり会話できなかったのが残念でしたが、それでも一度会って、お互いにゆっくり話をしようということになりました。なぜ、あんな事件を起こしてしまったのか。なぜ、何も言わずに黙っていなくなってしまったのか。そして今、お互いどんな思いを抱えて暮らしているのか。そのことを会った時に、思い切ってぶつけてみようと考えています。もちろん、そのことで、私もレイナも、過去の傷をさらに深めてしまうかもしれない。そして、 ひょっとしたら、やっぱり会わなければよかったと、後悔するかもしれないという不安は今でもあります。でも、私はやっぱり、レイナと話をすることから始めたいんです。食材とか懺悔とか、そんなものはもういらない。何もかも打ち明けて、話して、ぶつけ合って、それでも、レイナが私の友達でいてくれるかを、私はあの子に尋ねたい。そして私も、今度こそ本当の意味で、あの子の友達になれるかを確かめたい。だって、私は今でも、レイナのことが大好きだから。レイナのせいで悲しいことも味わったけど、彼女との楽しい思い出も、間違いなくたくさんあるんです。その思いを、私はあの子に伝えたい。そして、あの子が表に出せなかった悩みや苦しみを受け止めてあげたい。あの子が昔、私にそうしてくれたように。会った時、あの子は笑ってくれるかな？話す時の癖は、まだ残っているかな？いろんな不安だらけだけど、でも、それと同じくらい、期待もあります。だから、私は信じて、レイナと会ってきます。そして、刑事さんにいい報告ができるよう。結果は後日、お電話にてご報告します。もし、お忙しくてまた連絡が行き違うようでしたら、自宅の電話番号を書いておきましたので、お手すきの時にでもお電話をいただけましたら、とても嬉しいです。それではまた。今度お会いできた時には、園芸部で一番綺麗なお花を持っていきますので、楽しみにしていてください。尾崎渚。
Do anything. I couldn't help her at all. You know, I spoke so boldly. I haven't even gone a full hour into this yet, and I'm a depressed wreck. Good job, game. You drained me emotionally. She wasn't sure how much she drank, or which shop she stopped at before she made it here. By the time she came to her senses, Tomoe was sitting on a park bench. Drowning your sorrows, are we? The surrounding area was completely dark, and there were no indications of other people nearby. When she raised her head to take a look around, her line of sight sickeningly swayed in her drunken stupor.
今誰かに襲われたら完全アウトだな。
She bitterly smiled to herself, while trying to suppress the urge to vomit. No matter how many times she thought about planting her feet and standing up, she couldn't put the strength into her legs.
警察庁期待の女警部。酔って暴漢に襲われて死亡か。かっこ悪い。
But if she actually did get stabbed and fell down in a bloody mess, it probably wouldn't end so easily. She'd resist with all her might, trying to subdue the culprit, and in doing so ultimately lower her chances of being saved. She could imagine the face her sister would make when she found out about it.
ほんと、バカみたい。バカですよ。バカで悪かったな、ちっきしょ。
Tomoe leaned back into the bench and gazed up at the night sky as she spat those words out. Frustrated as she was, the sky was filled with a sea of beautiful stars, shining in full view.
見ないさ。
The twinkling of the stars suddenly distorted into an image of Nagisa's smiling face. The corners of her eyes began to heat up, and her chest tightened in pain.
結局何も守れなかった。それどころか事件に巻き込まなくても済んだはずの人を不幸にして。
No matter how much she regretted it, it wasn't enough. If Tomoe hadn't told her about Reina Ryuugu's whereabouts in the first place...
とんだ疫病神だ。私は。
Now that's not true. As the depression sank in, Tomoe's voice warped into a laugh that would likely give her a sore throat. Up until now, there were times she felt depressed because she failed, or something didn't work out. The sadness and regret drove her to drink enough to lose consciousness, more than once or twice in the past. However, this was the first time she lamented her own negligence and powerlessness, and hated herself so much that she wanted to hang herself by the neck.
あまり熱心になりすぎると後で辛いぞ。
The words of her old boss at the youth division, Section Chief Kishimoto, echoed through her drunken head. Deep down, she knew it was a bad habit to get emotional and personally attached to the ones involved. But even so, no matter how hard she tried, Tomoe couldn't abandon that mindset. The scars and memories from her time as a victim wouldn't allow her to do otherwise.
刑事、向いてないのかな。私には無理なのかな。
Then, Tomoe scooped up the can of beer she brought with her and guzzled it down her throat. She was long beyond the point she could even taste it. Tomoe was getting kicked out of Kakuichi next month. She hadn't even started on her father's case, and she couldn't catch the person who killed Nagisa. She was just clumsily and pitifully leaving it all behind. At this point, she didn't even care about the hate and ridicule of Okabe and the others saying, "Serves you right." In fact, what she felt most sad about was the people like Fujita who worried about her and placed their trust in her.
ごめんね、みんな。
They were good people. No matter how disappointed they were, they'd still try to encourage Tomoe. But just knowing that made it all the more painful. Unfortunately, they weren't her friends. They were comrades tied by a trusting workplace relationship. As their dependable boss, Tomoe's pride wouldn't allow them to cross that line by being overly sympathetic to her troubles.
今さら何をかっこつけてんだろうな、私。だけど。
Just then, she heard a strange sound coming from the distance. Is that you, imaginary Reina? I'm kind of having a moment right now. Can we do this later? What could it be? Was someone nearby? No. That wasn't it. She felt something like this before, not that long ago. That's right. She remembered. It was in Hinamizawa. After the gas was drained from her car, when she was walking to the phone booth, she heard the same sound back then. When she tried to stand up, she immediately collapsed on the spot. She had no strength left to fight it. Feeling like a fish on the chopping block, she gave in thought to herself, if you're going to kill me, do it now.
いいわよ。やりたきゃやれば。もう別にどうでもいいし。
At this point, all her hope and pride were exhausted. She was just a soulless shell who'd lost its purpose. If you want to kill me, feel free. If you want to sacrifice me to some curse, I'll go willingly. The sound slowly grew louder. Pat, pat, tap, tap. But even so, she wasn't afraid. Although that may have been due to a loss of sanity in her current drunken state. Before long, the sound continued echoing until it was right beside Tomoe. And then, it stopped. It certainly felt like someone was standing beside her. However, they didn't say or do anything. The silence continued for a while, but Tomoe eventually grew frustrated with the oppressive atmosphere and quickly turned her head to look up.
あれ?
However, there was nobody there. In fact, when Tomoe looked at the surrounding area, it was no longer the original park where she had fallen.
何ここ?
I know this place. Tomoe shook her head many times, thinking she was excessively drunk. But despite that, an indescribable space like a fantasy world was laid out before Tomoe's eyes.
一体私
あなただったんですね。
え?
Hanyu? That moment, she could feel a voice coming not through her ears, but directly inside her head, so she quickly took a look around. And then,
理科の運命を切り開く大切なかけらの一つ。隙間はようやく埋めたけど、端の方で欠けたところがどうしても見つからなかった。でも、ようやく見つけました。
あなた、誰?
An unfamiliar girl dressed in shrine maiden's clothes suddenly emerged in this empty space. It was a face she hadn't seen before, and she could see things resembling horns on her head. Who on earth was this girl?
あなたは不思議な存在。全く僕たちのことを知らない、関係のない人のはずなのに。あなたの存在が運命の歯車を変えてしまう。奇跡を必然へと昇華する。例えるならそう。トランプのジョーカーのような人。
ジョーカー？それに、運命の歯車って一体何？
歯車は全てが同じ向きにばかり回っていては噛み合わない。正しい動きをしない。中にはいくつか正反対の動きをするものがなければいけない。僕たちを取り巻く運命の歯車は強固すぎて、なかなか僕の思い通りには流れを変えてくれなかった。だから僕はちょっと奇跡を集めて理科の幸せを導き出した。そうしなければ流れは僕たちの思い通りには動いてくれなかったから。
She couldn't understand. Tomoe couldn't understand the meaning behind what this girl was saying.
でも、僕は気づいたのです。実は動いていない歯車がまだあって、それを動かすための歯車が一つ、回路から抜け落ちてしまっていたことを。それは、とても小さなものだけど、それを加えて動かせば、止まっていた歯車が動き出し、今までびくともしなかった 大きな歯車の向きが逆へと変わって動き出す。そしてその動きは一見僕たちの邪魔をするもの。でもその歯車一つの動きで奇跡は必然となり、運命のサイコロは僕たちの手へと移る。その歯車があなたです。かけらに残ったままどうしても外せなかったよどみを取り除き、あなた自身はそのよどみと共に離れてゆくけれど、その結晶をより堅固なものへと変える存在なのです。
Is this dream? Am I witnessing some ridiculous dream?
見ない巴。過去に苦しみ、それでも前に進もうとあがき続ける強い意志の人よ。僕たちにはあなたが必要。いえ、リカにはあなたが必要なんです。
待ってよ。リカって誰？それにそもそもあなたは一体何者？
僕はお社様。あなたの大切な人たちを傷つけ命を奪ったとあなたが誤解して憎み続ける上々の存在。
The blood suddenly ran to Tomoe's head, and she reflexively tried to stand up. But she lacked strength in her legs, so she fell in place. Still, even though she turned to the girl with rage in her eyes, the girl responded with a timid smile devoid of fear.
憎いですか？悔しいですか？そう。あなたのその黒い感情が僕たちには不可欠なもの。毒を持って毒を制すの例え通り、強固な黒い意志にくさびを打ち込めるのは黒い感情でしか成し得ないのです。待っています。このひなみ沢で。
あれ？
Well, I gotta say, Tomoe, you've been given quite the honor, haven't you? You're the Joker, and you're the Joker. Even though you play no direct role within the main story in any capacity whatsoever, turns out you are apparently quite pivotal in helping save the day within the final chapter of the main story. Can't really see how exactly, but, well, maybe we'll figure it out the further along we go, maybe, yeah? Either way, good on you, Tomoe. You've been promoted from a meta-narrative perspective, in my opinion. When Tomoe came back to her senses, she found herself on a park bench. She glanced at her watch to check the time. It was nearly morning.
寝ちゃったのか。寒い。
A chill ran all the way to her core, and her whole body suddenly began to shake. She had completely sobered up. There was a dull pain in her head, but her thoughts were cool and collected. Fortunately, she didn't seem to have caught a cold, despite sleeping in a place like this. More than that, it was a miracle that a young woman left defenseless like that was able to wake up in perfectly good health in the morning.
奇跡か。
It was a peculiar dream. She couldn't remember the face of the girl who appeared in her dream, but she could vaguely recall bits and pieces of her words. There was definitely something about turning gears around, and I remember. It was back then, when Reina Ryuugu attacked me. That girl was talking to me as my consciousness began to fade away, and that memory came back inside my head to form that dream. But looking at it in hindsight, I can't deny the possibility that what I saw and heard back then was a dream too.
毒をもって毒を制す。黒には黒でぶつかるか。
At first, she couldn't quite understand the meaning. But as she continued to ponder it, little by little, she was able to piece it together. Fight hate with hate. It wasn't as simple as standing up and fighting with revenge in your heart. That simply made it a collision between two egos. In other words, it was about approaching your opponent with the same passion, but also with understanding. It is only because you feel your own strong, dark emotions that you're in a position to understand your adversaries. And in doing so, you also know how to calm your opponent. Humans are not wild animals. With few exceptions, they rely on reasoning rather than instinct. So, when a person chooses to attack another, there is a reason that drove them to action. In order to identify that, you must first know the other person and their sense of values. Know thy enemy. Find the source of despair that nobody else could understand, and unravel the dark emotions that drove them to solitude. That's right. Because compassion and animosity are two sides of the same coin. And, as those words repeated in Tomoe's head over and over, she realized that the hopeless despondency she had been feeling till last night was no longer there.
なるほどね。そういうことか。
Tomoe stood up as she said that. She glanced at the empty can in her hand and then at a trash can a short distance away and tossed it in a snap. The can raced through the air in a slightly arcing path. A dull sound rang out as it collided with the aluminum on the edge, and then fell right in place. Nice shot. If you speak of justice, the others will laugh at you. What a naive, helpless thing to say. If you speak of evil, the others will berate you. What a callous, cruel thing to say. Everyone remains silent, but the truth is, everyone already understands. Spring 1983, 6 months after Tomoe Minai's transfer to the Public Relations Office.
Who
is this edgy-looking boy? In the end, no Oh.
岡部の野郎はカリカリ来てるみたいだぜ。
Ah, so you're Hanada, huh?
これで2本。自分のところで県警本部の世話役を抱え込んでるからな。他の山が全然回りきれてなくて、この間畑副所長からお叱りをいただいたってさ。
いい君だよ。身の程を知れってんだ。
After all that, they couldn't find anything resembling a clue at the crime scene, and they didn't have a profile on the culprit. Even searching through lists of classmates and known degenerates, they couldn't find anything at all. There was almost no doubt that the case would go unsolved, so the morale in the field was on the decline.
そういや、あれからあの人、今頃どうしてるかな。
なんだ、藤田。お前、惚れたのか？
バカ、違うよ。広報室なんかに飛ばされて、腐ってやめちまってるんじゃないかって。それが心配でさ。
In fact, Fujita couldn't believe that a nerd detective that capable would ever come out of the National Police Agency or the Metropolitan Police Department. Her extraordinary work ethic and analytical capability were far above anyone he'd ever worked with, regardless of age or gender. And if she had taken part in this joint investigation, Maybe she would have been able to make full use of her abilities to squeeze out a profile on the criminal. At the very least, Fujita and the others believed that Tomoe was capable of it.
なんかあれ以来、一家って気が抜けたような感じじゃないか。山村さんが悪いわけじゃないけど、やっぱ違ってたよな。
そうだな。
Shiro Hanada agreed with Fujita's assessment while sitting next to him. After all, her investigation policies were clear and easy to understand, as opposed to running around based on intuition without any tangible confirmation. Of course, they couldn't deny that it was fortunate the incidents they investigated were consistent with Tomoe's analytical methodology. Still, there are people out there with the power to make their own luck. That too is one of her strengths.
ま、警察みたいなセクショナリズムの社会に、ああいう破天荒な女性は合わなかったってことだろうさ。もったいない話だけどさ。
誰が破天荒だって？
え？
Fujita and Honda jumped in surprise when they suddenly heard a voice calling from behind. And when they looked back, the person standing before them was...
みなりさん？
何よ、幽霊でも見たような顔をして。
I don't know, you seem a little more transparent to me than usual today. Maybe you are a ghost.
足はちゃんとあるわよ。
So, they could be prosthetic.
いや、そうじゃなくて。なんでここに？
別に警察官がここを訪れるのは変じゃないでしょ？なんかおかしい？
Indeed, even though Tomoe worked for the public relations office, she was still a police officer, so it wasn't that unusual for her to come to Kakuichi Station. Although, knowing her character, she wasn't the type to say, I just came to say hi. So what was the meaning of this?
藤田くん、花田くん。
Please tell me you're coming back.
早速だけど、二人にもまた足やってもらうわよ。
え？じゃあ。
と、その前に山村課長ね。はあ、もっと前にアンニャローのところにも行かなきゃ。あとは。
And even though Tomoe was no longer in a position to order them around anymore, Fujita and Honda immediately responded to her request by saying, "Understood," and quickly rushing out. Their sense of servitude was so deeply ingrained they were like loyal dogs. But as Fujita ran down the corridor, before long his cheeks split into a huge grin.
山沖所長、こちらにサインを。
うん。まどかくん。
南井巡査です。お間違いのないように。
Uh-oh. Trouble in paradise, Yamaoki? Yamaoki looked embarrassed after being corrected in such a sharp, cold tone.
ではその南井巡査。
はい、山沖所長。私に何か？
実はこの前知人から演劇のチケット2枚もらってな。よかったら今度。
Would you care to go this time? What, did she decline the last time? If so, then yeah, we definitely got trouble in paradise.
申し訳ありませんが、私の休日の予定は3ヶ月後まで埋まっております。その後でもよろしければ、ぜひ誘ってくださいませ。
She'd been so blunt that she wouldn't give him the time of day. She'd been like this toward him for the last half a year. When he told her that Tomoe was being transferred to the public relations office, she was deeply upset. Crying, yelling, telling him off, and in the end even throwing things around. Just like I wanted to do to him, but you wouldn't let me, sis! There were still marks on his desk from when Monica struck it with a golf club back then. That's the golf club I wanted to use! In that way, She really was so much like her sister. And so, Yamaoki let out a sigh.
まどか君。だから何度も話したようにこれには深い理由が。
あったんでしょうね。ですから、私の感知するところではございません。私がこうやって怒っているのも、対局を見ることのできない歪小な一巡査が、極めて個人的に不満を抱いているだけですので。どうぞ、お気になさらないでくださいまし。
The passive aggressiveness is real. He was at his wits' end. With things as they were, no progress would be made unless they talked about it. But he couldn't say anything in the current situation. Maka had finally returned to living in Yamaoki's house, but she had been living in Tomoe's old single-occupancy apartment until last month. Oh, sis. Just for guarding my old home like this and giving Yamaoki a hard time, I think I will forgive you and not to launch you out a window with a parachute after all. With that in mind, you could say that the relationship was still getting better, but it was hard to deny the possibility that just one more little thing could spell the end of their engagement. Well, I'm sure Tomoe would be happy with that arrangement. Though that catastrophic pattern was typical in relationships, regardless of age difference. He just had to let her sort out her feelings. Also, Maka caused a great deal of turmoil since she first started at Kakuichi Station. Enough so that she was expecting a 1-month suspension. However, Yamaoki had lived alone for so many years that when she moved out, the space felt especially small and lonely. It was hard for anyone who knew him to be true to believe, but he had already deeply bowed his head and apologized to her over 20 times. But she still hadn't forgiven him, and that Cold War continued even now. Keep fighting, sis! And so, all it took was a single fierce glare, and he couldn't think of anything else. He easily recognized the outcome of any action he took, so he never did anything. There was nothing he could do. Because of that, he ended up repeating the same sad questions and answers. And in some ways, maybe even being taken advantage of by his feelings for her. Just then, he heard a knock on the door. Normally, he would have asked the person to announce who they were before entering the room, but in this case, he wanted to shake off the dreary atmosphere, so he responded to come in a dignified voice. And then... The door swung open and she came in, saying, "Excuse me." Maka and Yamaoki's eyes opened wide in shock as soon as they recognized Tomoe. Naturally, they didn't know in advance that she was coming. When Tomoe noticed their reactions, she had a mischievous smile on her face as she donned a salute.
南井巴、警察庁長官官房の総務課長の代理でご挨拶に伺いました。少々お時間よろしいでしょうか。
じゃあ、私は。
別にいてもいいわよ。いずれ遅かれ早かれみんなの耳に入ることなんだし。
Maka stared on in disbelief as Tomoe spread the file in her hands out in front of Yamaoki. Inside were a bunch of documents clipped together.
警察庁長官官房から愛知県警と柿内署への協力要請です。了解をいただき次第、後日正式な通達書を送付させていただきます。
The heading inscribed on the cover said this: Establishing an operational test regarding the use of profiling techniques to investigate unsolved cases.
これは
What this is round 2. Round 2, specifically, of solving Nagisa, Kouhei, and her father's murders.
実は先日、 前の広報室長のご紹介で総務課長、長官官房長とお会いする機会がございまして、そこで少々ご歓談のお時間をいただくことができました。
It was totally coincidental, but incredibly fortuitous. And it was a rare one-in-a-million opportunity that she had earned through her strong convictions. A few days after Tomoe started at the Public Relations Office, the Secretariat heard that she was a fellow alumnus of Kashima University, so he called her into his office just to give her encouragement. During their chat, Tomoe offhandedly mentioned her profiling investigation technique to the Secretariat. And she mentioned that it had already been tested in Kakuichi with wonderful results.
さすがに僭越な行為と承知しておりましたが、今までにまとめた資料をたまたま持参しておりましたので、これ幸いと思って目を通していただきました。
Both the Secretariat and the Director of General Affairs were a bit surprised when they saw it. After all, these profiling techniques were published in lengthy documents written in English, so it was difficult to decipher the details without putting significant effort into it. And this young elite trainee casually translated and summarized it, achieved amicable results while testing it on real cases, and assembled a report detailing all her findings. The Secretariat was always interested in pursuing new techniques, and thanks to all the work she put into it, he was particularly interested.
それを受けて官房長のお力で報告書の内容を科警研にも紹介してくれることになりました。そこで偶然にもその実行例の詳細をすべて管理しておりましたので、科警研の総務部長にそれらをレポートとして提出したのです。
The reaction was stunning. Originally, the National Research Institute of Police Science was conducting their own research on Western profiling techniques. But even though they understood the basic premises, they had no operational data to analyze. And even when they tried to pursue that endeavor, progress was extremely slow because of the sectionalized nature of the police force. Detectives in the field were also anxious that new techniques would jeopardize their positions. Meanwhile, Tomoe showed up with all the data compiled from her time at the Ibaraki Prefectural Police Department in her 2 months at Kakuichi and offered it up for free, so they welcomed it with open arms. In response to that, the general manager of NRIPS invited the director to a hearing with her. Of course, the fact that Tomoe was a woman certainly did pique some curiosity. But even so, she opted to use that to her advantage, and after talking it over, the director gave an official proclamation that the process should be tested on an actual investigation. As a result, NRIPS assembled a research team and launched a full-scale investigation into profiling methodology.
しかし君は広報室で。
ええ、ですから私は関与いたしません。その代わり広報室係長としてこの件についての報道対応を任されることになりました。
報道？これをマスコミに公開するのか？
はい。実はテレビ局に企画書を持ち込みました。欧米における最新の捜査手法の特集をやらないかと。3ヶ月以内に迷宮入りの難事件を解決してみせるって大見え切って密着取材にも許可を出したら喜んで飛びついてきましたよ。
Maka shouted in astonishment. Tomoe had always hated working with the media. So what on earth brought about this change of heart?
でも、捜査内容の開示は良くないってお姉ちゃん言ってなかった？
もちろん、彼らに見せるのはほんの一部。上っ面の部分だけよ。それに、それとは別に、女性向けインタビューを2本独占で受けることになってるから、実際の彼らの優先順位はそっちの方が上。そういうわけで、 女性の権利拡大の弁士として思いっきり威勢のいいことを語ってあげるって言ったら、もう大喜びで協力してくれるってさ。
There you go, Tomoe. Using the agenda pushers to your own advantage.
悪人。
She's terribly smart, Monica.
ありがとう。最高の褒め言葉よ。
Tomoe nonchalantly shot that back. Disregarding her name to obtain results was normal for her. But compromising and cooperating with all manner of people was totally different from Tomoe's old way of thinking. So, Monica, feeling like she was dreaming right now, pinched her own cheek hard. It was incredibly painful. I can pinch your cheek for you if you need something harder. I got good grip strength. Just then, Fujita knocked on the door and then entered the chief's office.
みないさん、刑事一課に大きな段ボールの荷物が届いてるんですが、あれって何ですか？
ああ、藤田くん、それは私の荷物なの。中身はパソコンだから、扱いは丁寧にお願いね。
パソコンですか？一体何に使うんですか？
遅れてるわね、藤田くん。これからはパソコンの時代よ。山沖所長。柿内署の合同捜査本部内に専用船の配置を行いたいので、ご許可をいただけますでしょうか。
Still unable to dismiss his feelings of confusion, Yamaoki simply nodded. Didn't she say she wasn't interested in computers before? It was a completely unthinkable change. Was this really Tomoe Minai? I'm trying to pronounce Tomoe's name backwards in my head, but I think this is something I'll seriously have to think about for a minute. Was there any chance she was actually replaced by an alien taking her form? Next moment.
Yamaoki 所長。
Tomoe turned to him with a serious expression and deeply bowed her head. And then,
ありがとうございました、所長。私はもう少しで正義というものを見失うところでした。
The look on her face as she said that had a pleasant atmosphere, suggesting she had dispelled her earlier demons.
感情的な復讐心や自己満足の行いは、自分の失敗を認めたくないという見苦しさの産物です。自分は正しいと一人で思い込んで、誰にも頼らず、誰の言葉にも耳を貸さない、独りよがりの未熟なまがいものの正義です。でも、それでは本当の悪には勝てない。いえ、戦えない。こちらが犯罪を取り締まるため、あらゆる手段と知識を蓄えているように、相手も同様の準備をしてこちらを叩き潰そうと、その武器を磨いている。そんな奴らに一人でできることなんてたかが知れています。
So, Tomoe gathered all her hatred and resentment and cast them aside, and she replaced her selfish thoughts and convictions with a general desire to gain the understanding of the people around her.
自分の正義と警察の正義。相反するときは自ら屈して妥協して警察の正義に合わせるのも一つのやり方です。しかし、その逆も確かにあります。様々な権力と発言力を握る各方面の人々すべてを説得し、理解してもらい、その上で仲間になってもらう方法です。
Of course, that takes a great deal of time and effort, and sincerity, and there's still no guarantee of success. But even so, the possibility is greater than zero. It's definitely not impossible. So, Tomoe identified her small pieces of luck and used them to their maximum effect. her contacts at the National Police Agency, the staff on the National Research Institution of Police Science, and the profile and investigation methodology she learned of Honjo and her comrades at the Ibaraki Prefectural Police Department. She never spared a moment of free time either. She was always negotiating with them during her usual daily work, consulting with them, requesting they share data, and seeking their approval on matters. And even if it seems an easy thing to say, accomplishing that in just half a year was no simple task. But even so, she never gave up. She earned the help and cooperation of so many people by approaching other parties over and over, and persuading them, trying to win their agreement. And as a result, she was able to greet everyone here today.
今回の一件が成功すれば、その成果は科警研のものです。私自身が関わることはほとんどありません。ですが、正義はあります。それこそが私が警察官として今ここにいる理由です。
From the perspective of many police officials, she looked like a soft-souled person. She was also aware of how many people perceived her as a woman. But that was what she wanted. If they were willing to lend Tomoe their strength, or as long as they weren't trying to get in her way, it was ultimately beneficial for her. Tomoe wasn't simply performing well to achieve her career advancement. And she wasn't investigating crimes to clear up her own hatred or personal grudges. To go even further, she wasn't doing that for the victims or their families either. The police shouldn't carry out investigations seeking revenge. Woo-shi? There absolutely is justice in this world to judge wrongdoers and admonish their sins. And those who stand before the wall of justice with evil in their hearts will surrender to its power and discipline themselves. It was Yamaoki who taught Tomoe that. In order to create a society that can believe in that, the police need to fight crime with the full backing of the law. To that end, it's necessary to understand the psychology of the criminal, and sometimes even be in sync with them. It was a truly naive way of thinking, but it was first class. Even if my effort and feelings aren't always rewarded, so what? Rather than twisting the world to my own intentions, I'll bet everything on living my life honestly. It's fine to get hurt. And even if you fall, even if you're pushed down, you have to get up again and again, no matter how hard it is, doing your best to maintain your convictions. That's why I choose to follow the path of the police officer. Police force.
Tomoe-kun.
God damn it.
君を。
それに、そもそも悪が手段を選ばない以上、正義だってそうあるべきですよね。一人の悪役に5人総出でタコ殴りにしても、巨大ロボットで踏みつけたとしても、正義である限りは卑怯なんて考えてはいけないんです。だって正義は必ず勝たなきゃいけないんですから。
お姉ちゃん。
未来さん。
Maka and Fujita could only stare on, looking overwhelmed as Tomoe so proudly declared that. But Yamaoki wasn't like that. Her answer was so earnest that it was comical, and he couldn't bear the absurdity of how exasperatingly resolute she was. Hey, Yusuke! This incredibly bold willingness to take action, to never give in. Your daughter's exactly like you, from head to toe.
そんなわけですから、しばらくまたお世話になります。どうかお手柔らかに。
ああ、好きにやりたまえ。
Very well. Let's see this girl's future all the way through to the end. Yamaoki said that to himself and washed her back as she turned and stepped out of the room.
本日より大巻女子学生殺人事件の合同捜査本部に科警研による特別チームが参加することとなりました。プロファイリング捜査の運用マニュアルを作成するための重要なテストケースとなりますので、皆様にはご協力とご理解をよろしくお願いします。
The senior researcher, dispatched from NRIPS, spoke respectfully, but with a dignified demeanor, as he addressed the entire investigation team. In the center was the person responsible for this investigation headquarters, Director Yamaguchi, and Section Chief Dojima of the 1st Investigation Division at Prefectural HQ. And Tomoe was sitting on the left corner of the executive seating area of the platform.
でありますから、今回の事件にあたっては、被害者が当時交際しておりました沢村康平が入院中の病院から転落死した事件、そしてその死亡に関わったとされる看護師の平沼陽子の自殺事件との関連性を調査した上で犯人像の割り出し分析を行う予定です。なお現地の捜査にあたっては所轄署の協力が不可欠であり。
While listening to the explanation from the meeting facilitator, Section Chief Dojima, Tomoe pulled a photo out of her handbag. It was one of Nagisa Ozaki's belongings, found at the crime scene. A copy of the photo of Nagisa and Reina found in her pink wallet.
尾崎さん、やっとここまで来たよ。
She whispered that to herself while gently smiling at the photo. In addition to the photo, the contents of the wallet included a train ticket bound for Okinomiya and a receipt for a store she visited on the date of the incident. In other words, Nagisa went to see Reina Ryuugu. Although it wasn't clear if they were able to meet and talk, but it meant she was caught up in the incident after coming back from there. And there were 2 separate times Tomoe was attacked by that girl. With that in mind, it was highly likely that Reina Ryuugu was involved in some way, even if she wasn't the actual culprit. No, she has to know something.
待っていなさい、竜宮レーナ。
That's right. Everything starts now. I won't let it end. Not a chance. No matter how cunning or even supernatural my foe may be, I'll bring this chain of tragedies to a close. And for that reason, I'll use everything at my disposal to keep on fighting.
それから今回はマスコミ関係者向けの報道取材対応を警察庁広報室に担当していただきます。南井係長、どうぞ。
At Section Chief Dojima's urging, Tomoe stood up and took a bow. She could see Monica standing near the opposite wall, offering an encouraging smile.
広報室特務係長の南井です。報道取材対応を担当いたします。よろしくお願いします。
I won't give up. Ever. I'll make that miracle a reality. I'll carve a path to destiny with my own 2 hands. It's really over? You serious? Like, for crying out loud, this feels like a time in the story, within this particular arc story, where things were really starting to get interesting. And right when it feels like it was about to lead up into something else, even bigger, it just ends like this. Like, is it just me, or am I the only one who's feeling surprised in a disappointed sort of way as to how this all ended. I don't know how else to describe it other than it just feels surprisingly anticlimactic. Even with that whole scene with Tomoe and Hanyu thrown in there for good measure. And I still don't understand how exactly Minai could really help with changing Rika's fate. Unless this will get explained in another arc, then all I can say is, what the hell? New tips unlocked, dancing in the palm of my hand. Okay, I guess we got one last thing here. Let's see what this is.
で、どうします？このまま放置か、処分か。まあ、私としては、さっさと片付けるに越したことはないと思いますがね。
ダメよ、そういう請求な考え方は。警察ってのは、どんな形であれ、身内を殺されると、徹底的に追いかけてくるんだから。あなた一人がスケープゴートになるというのなら、別に止めないけど。
This voice sounds familiar.
冗談じゃないですよ。命知らずな刑事の命一つと自分の貴重な将来じゃ全然割が合いません。
He had a bitter expression on his face, but his tone was light. Even if left alone, it wasn't a major threat.
それにしてもちょっと意外ですね。関係のありそうなところは根こそぎ潰してかかるのがあなたのやり方だと思っていましたが、何の罪もない女の子を殺したことに良心の痛みを感じて、今さら人道主義に方向転換ですか？
あなたも言うわね。別にあの刑事さんを憐れんでのことじゃないわ。ただちょっと面白い実験ができるかなってね。
実験？
ええ、どうやらあの子あとちょっとで末期発症に入りそうなの。でもその状態にもかかわらず平静を保っている。
Terminal phase. Who? Not Tomoe.
うまくやれば新しい臨床データを入手できるんじゃないかしら。
なるほど。モルモットですか。いや、さっき言った人道主義の言葉を撤回させてください。あなたは正真正銘の外道ですよ。少なくとも人間じゃない。
ありがとう。
Card carrying villain much?
最高の賛辞だわ。
それじゃ潜伏する連絡員たちにはそのように伝えます。よろしいですか？
ええ、よろしくお願いね。
すべては小野が手のひらの上で踊る戯れか。ま、それもいいでしょう。どちらが菩薩で孫悟空なのか。あと
I swear I heard that woman's voice somewhere before.
あなたの2つの復讐をお手伝いします。一つはあなたの祖父のための復讐。あなたの祖父の論文を嘲笑った者たちにもう一度うやうやしく手に取らせてやりましょう。彼らが土足で踏みつけたその論文をね。もう一つはあなたと祖父の約束であり、 心のつながりでもある症候群の研究を派閥争いだけを理由に踏みにじり、研究を彼らの権益のためだけに終わらそうとする理事会への復讐。あなたの目の前で資料を踏みにじり、あなたの人生さえも踏みにじろうとした豚どもへの復讐。
祖父の論文を手に取らせ、それを踏みにじった理事会に復讐する。
Well, that tip definitely was also interesting, but doesn't really do much to alleviate my feelings on how I feel this whole particular arc ended. Well, guess that's that then. So I guess I'll just go ahead and end this episode here, and next time we're gonna start the next console arc. So so for what it's worth, I hope everybody enjoyed this latest episode of the Higurashi and the Cry console arcs, even if some of you may or may not feel the same way I do about how this arc has ended. And if you did enjoy it, and you want to see more content from me, feel free to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you all next time. Take care.